If classics like this freak you out, this is the video for you. Like anyone else, when I see classics like War and Peace, The Count of Monte Cristo, any Charles Dickens novel, insert massive, dense, chonker classic here, I definitely have that little bit of, man, I wish I could read that so I could be impressive and tell everybody that I've read it, but also that would mean I'd have to read it. Whenever we talk about classic novels, it's very nerve-wracking because we maybe love to read them, but they're intimidating, let's be honest. A lot of them are very intimidating. So if you've been wanting to get into classics or read a classic recently that maybe doesn't have the same intimidation factor as War and Peace, I hope this video will give you a few recommendations that would be helpful. The first one I want to talk about is one of the newer classics on this list, and that is The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. This is one of my books of the year in 2022. I've been a massive fan of the film since I was very young, probably a teenager, and I read the book last year and it did not disappoint. The Outsiders is a book that was written in the 1960s about a group of boys in kind of a street gang that are locked in this war between themselves and a group called the Socs. We have the Greasers and the Socs. It's kind of a similar West Side Story vibe. We follow a bunch of young characters. This is definitely a coming-of-age story, but the depth to which S.E. Hinton takes us with these characters and shows the after effects of the street wars that happen between these young characters is truly profound. I loved this story. The characters in this story are so incredibly powerful, and I love this story. It is definitely one that you might want some Kleenexes around you when you read, but this book is incredible. And I do think that the film did a really good job representing it, so if you wanted to check the film out as well as read the book, definitely would recommend that. Now, if you want to take a turn into a slightly more challenging book, if you want to consider it that, this is a story that has a little tinge of romance, but it's set in a very twisted kind of gothic horror atmosphere, and that is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. This was a book I read in college and I really enjoyed it. The language is definitely a bit more what you would expect in a classic novel, but as you can see, it isn't massively long, and I feel like the characters inside are incredibly compelling. Our protagonist, Jane Eyre, goes through some pretty rough situations in life. She has relatives that don't like her, she goes to an oppressive boarding school, and then she is given her first assignment to be a governess of sorts or tutor for a young woman who is under the care of a very elusive rich man who lives in the country. This is where the gothic horror atmosphere really starts to show, because Jane Eyre shows up at this house. She meets the master of the house, who is the dark, brooding, we kind of have a Beauty and the Beast slight vibe here, and as we get further and further into these characters, more and more dark secrets are uncovered, and I won't spoil the end of the book for you, but I really liked Jane Eyre a lot. It's one of my favorite classics, and I think that it is definitely a good entry point for anyone who is looking to read a book that has that classic quality, but it is still very readable. Another book from the 1960s that I want to pull right now is one of my favorite historical fiction books of all time. It is The Tall Woman by Wilma Dykeman. Now, this is a book that I have not heard hardly anybody talk about, and I love it. My midwife actually gave this book to me as a gift years ago, and I fell in love with this character. Lydia McQueen is our protagonist in this story, and it is her journey as a pioneer woman, wife, and mother, and later on a matriarch in her community. She's a midwife. She is basically responsible for the safety and raising of her family, and goes through a lot of really hard circumstances, and her spirit of resilience through this story is incredibly beautiful to read. I think that this book honestly feels like it was written a little bit ahead of its time. I think it's a beautiful story about the strength of womanhood, and Lydia is a character that will draw you in with her just hearty, practical perseverance through the life that she's been given. Next up is the shortest book on this list, and that is A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Now, if you want to get a taste test of the great Charles Dickens without delving into one of his larger novels, A Christmas Carol is definitely a book that is easy to read. It is light, it has a lot of warm feelings, but also a lot of profound lessons. This is the story of Ebenezer Scrooge, a man who is very grumpy and unkind to the people around him, and one Christmas holiday season, he is visited by a set of spectral visitors, and they each teach him something and bring him to an awareness of the person that he has been for most of his life. As we approach the Christmas season, I couldn't help putting this one on my list. I know that this one is on a lot of people's lists as a great entry point for classics, and I couldn't agree more, because you're getting a lot of the character work that Charles Dickens is so well known for in a bite-sized package. Another book that I want to put on this list is another one that probably won't be a surprise to most people, and that is Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. This book is unhinged. There have been so many reiterations of it throughout the years, and I really loved reading through the original back when I was in college. We have Alice, of course, who is our main protagonist, who falls down the rabbit hole into this wild, kooky, wonderful land of Wonderland. And she meets an array of very vibrant and interesting characters along the way and finds out a lot about herself and the world that she is now kind of held in with both friends and foes. If you're looking for something that is a little bit more lighthearted, definitely has stronger fantasy elements to it, but is a well-beloved classic, then Alice in Wonderland is definitely a good one to reach for. Okay, next up, I want to recommend White Fang by Jack London. This is a book that has been incredibly influential to me throughout the years since I read it when I was a child. And what I love so much about this story is it takes a character who cannot speak, who is not human, and it is one of the most emotionally profound stories I have ever read. White Fang is a wolf that is born in the wild. He is captured and goes through a series of really horrific life experiences with different people that own him until he reaches a different version of life towards the end of the book. And I don't want to say much more than that, but the journey that this character goes through is so powerful. It is so, so powerful. And it is not a book for the faint of heart. It is definitely a story that is very difficult to read, but I feel like the character of this story is just brilliantly written, and it is a character that has inspired me many, many times over in my own work as a writer. Next up, I'm going to recommend a short story. Now, this is for those of you who might be murder, mystery, thriller / horror fans, and that is The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. This is also a short story I was introduced to in college, and I was blown away by how potent this story is. It's a short story that has lived in my head since the moment I read it, and it has not left. Now, this story is about a woman who is basically closeted away in her bedroom because she is having quote-unquote mental issues by her husband and doctor, and she slowly goes crazy. Sounds great, right? It is such a profound look at an exploration of mental illness and how isolation feeds those struggles. This is another one that is hard to read, but it is so well written. I am very much looking forward to checking out Charlotte Perkins Gilman's other stories within this book, and I definitely think it is still to this day the best short story that I have ever read. Last but not least, I have a book that will probably, again, not surprise you guys to see it. It has been on lists like this many times in the past, and I think rightfully so, and that is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This is the second book on this list written by a 16-year-old or 17-year-old, very young woman, and I think that's awesome. This book, do yourself a favor and read this book. Frankenstein is such a beautiful exploration of what it means to be human, and what it means to dehumanize someone and what makes us human, and that search for the human, an explanation of the human condition. We have Dr. Victor Frankenstein, who creates this horrific monster out of who knows what body parts, and we have the monster that he creates, and those are the two main characters throughout the story. And as we read, the question is posed to the reader, as along with many others, who is the real monster in this scenario? And I will leave you to judge that for yourself. Frankenstein is a fairly short classic novel. It definitely has the classic language and feel that you would expect from that genre, but it is such a beautiful book. And if you allow yourself to really take a moment and think and listen to what the story is saying, I think it can be a powerful experience. Those are my 8 recommendations for you if you are concerned about jumping into intimidating classics. I hope one of these books catches your interest and that you enjoy the read if you decide to check it out. If you've had experience with any of these books, definitely go down in the comments below and let me know. I would love also if you want to recommend other classics that you think would be great for people who are watching this video. Definitely include those as well. I hope you are all having 5-star reads, and I will see you in the next video.